Chapter 22. A New Partner. He who wins 1,000 common hearts is therefore entitled to some renown, but he who keeps undisputed sway over the heart of a coquette is indeed the hero. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. January came in with a bang, or at least it did for everyone else. Mine was more of a dull thud. I spent New Year's Eve alone, too depressed to even wait for the ball to drop. Mom and Dad went out to celebrate with some friends, so I went to bed early. It wasn't like I had anything to be happy about. My boyfriend didn't want to be my boyfriend. My best friend was still dead, and midterms were about to start as soon as I went back to school. Definitely nothing to be happy about. In my last few fleeting days of freedom, I worked non-stop on my Sleepy Hollow perfume project. I decided to make 1 scent for each of the main characters, but first I wanted to create scents that evoked the settings and emotions of the legend. I had the perfect combination in mind for one I wanted to call the Midnight Hour, and I spent long hours trying to perfect it. I thought about working on my business plan, but the temptation to play with perfumes was too strong, and the distraction from my thoughts was therapeutic. Overall, it was a somber and quiet yet productive holiday. When school started up again, we had 2 final days of prep before midterms began. I was actually glad for the extra schoolwork, and I buried myself in books the entire time. It seemed like I had forgotten almost everything that we'd reviewed before the holidays. My brain felt hollow and stuffy. Uncle Bob probably would have joked about my head rattling. In the end, I surprised even myself by managing to pass all my tests. I barely squeaked by in math, pulling in a low C, but I got a B in history and everything else was in the A range. Mom and Dad gave me a well-rehearsed "you've got to apply yourself more" speech, of course, but I let it go in one ear and out the other. They probably would have given me that same speech if I'd brought home all A minuses. We didn't get much of a break at school once our midterm week was over. The next bombshell was dropped on us the following Monday morning in science class. Mr. Knickerbocker waited patiently until everyone was seated and had their textbooks out before he made the big announcement. I was fidgeting with my pencil, rolling it back and forth on the desktop, when I heard him clear his throat. "Ladies and gents, if I can please have your attention." The quiet chatter came to a stop and the room grew still. "I know you're all very sad that midterms are finished." We groaned on cue and he gave a wide fake smile. "But I have some good news for you." His stiff brown tie bobbed slightly and he started pacing in front of the chalkboard, hands clasped behind his back. There was no way this was good news. Science did not equal good news. He came to a halt and held one finger up. "It's science time, people." Another groan filled the air, but he kept right on talking, like he didn't hear us. To be precise, it's science fair time, that wonderful time of year when you get to wreck your tiny little brains and then dazzle me with your brilliance. I rolled my eyes. This was definitely not good news. Mr. Knickerbocker had a reputation for not letting people pick their own partners for science fair, and with my luck I'd get stuck with one of the girls from the cheerleading squad. This year, instead of devising an alternate way of picking partners, I'm just going to do it alphabetically starting from Z. As soon as you and your partners are paired up, I'll expect you to change seats. You'll be sitting next to your partner for the rest of the school year. Now I really held my breath and even said a silent prayer. Mentally working my way through the alphabet, I breathed a sigh of relief when I realized that none of the cheerleaders' last names started with an A, B, or C. Mr. Knickerbocker continued on. "You'll have 3 months to work on your project. Entries are due during the 2nd week of April. At that time we'll be holding the science fair and you'll be responsible for giving a presentation on your project. This will make up 25% of your grade, people, so think long and hard. Any questions, please see me after class." I tuned out when you started assigning partner names, and the room quickly filled with the sounds of scraping chairs and squeaking desks. It took him a surprisingly long time to get to my name, and I pasted a bored expression onto my face, hoping that whomever I got stuck with would get the hint that I did not want to make any new friends. Chairs were still scraping loudly and students were settling in when he finally called my name, so I missed who was supposed to be my partner. I sat frozen in my seat, hoping that the person who would be sitting beside me for the next couple of months was making their move. Because I sure wasn't. Glancing discreetly over my shoulder, I saw a girl sitting behind me with an identical look of boredom on her face and an empty chair next to her. I turned back around to move my books and go sit by her, when all of a sudden Ben plopped down next to me. "What are you doing?" I asked him. I'm confused was probably written all over my face. He just raised his eyebrows and grinned at me. "I'm Bennett. You're Browning, right?" Comprehension still hadn't dawned. "Yeah, so?" "I'm your new partner," he laughed. My cheeks turned red. "Oh," I said lamely. I must not have been paying attention. He shook his head and piled his books neatly over to one side. "So, any ideas for what we can do? Or were you not paying attention to anything?" Mr. Knickerbocker said. I kicked his foot under the desk and felt a gleam of satisfaction when he doubled over. He was still laughing, but I could tell he wasn't being mean about it. "No, Mr. Hotshot Listener, I don't have any ideas. What about you?" He rattled off an idea involving math, DNA, and some type of space travel, but I was already shaking my head. "Come on, get real, science nerd. It's a science project, not science fiction. If you want to be responsible for the entire project, then by all means be my guest and go for that one. But if you actually want me to do any work, then you have to pick something a little less Star Trek and a little more normal." Crossing his arms in front of his chest, he leaned back on two legs of the chair. "Well, if you don't have any ideas, then how can you contribute?" I shrugged. "I don't know. I'll go to the library and look in a book or something. There's got to be a ton of ideas in there." Now he shrugged. "Whatever. But I don't want you to skip over any cool ideas, so I'll come too." "Do you have a free study hall last period?" I asked. He nodded. "Okay, we'll go then." He leaned his chair back down onto the ground and winked at me. "Great, it's a date." I just buried my face in my hands and shook my head. It was going to be a really long 3 months. I had agreed to meet Ben by the main school doors at the end of our last class, and I tugged impatiently on the strap of my book bag while I waited for him. The bell had rung 10 minutes ago, and I was ready to get out of here before anyone questioned what I was doing just hanging around. He showed up 5 minutes later, grinning shamefully and spouting off some sorry excuse, but I was already sailing through the double doors, content to leave him behind. He caught up with me a minute later and tugged on my book bag when I started to turn left in the direction of the library. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Parking lot's in the other direction." I came to a stop. "It's not that far to the library. I just figured we'd walk." Ben shook his head. "I'm not leaving my car here, and it's freezing. Come on." I exhaled loudly as I followed him to the student parking lot, navigating the maze of cars as we went. "What am I looking for?" I called, scanning in several directions. "It's right over here." I couldn't see him anymore, so I followed the sound of his voice and stopped when I came to a battered green Jeep Cherokee. He was sitting inside, revving the engine. "Your chariot waits," he said over the loud noise. "Come on, get in." I tried not to laugh when the puff of black smoke shot out the exhaust. Chucking my bag into the back seat, I shook my head as I climbed in on the passenger side. "You know, you're really pushy." He slowly pulled out of the parking space, and I struggled with the seatbelt at my shoulder. "Here," he said, reaching over and giving it a sharp tug. "You have to find its sweet spot." I burst out laughing. "Your car has a sweet spot? You're kidding, right? Next you'll tell me that you've named it too." He kept his eyes on the road but nodded. "Of course, all good cars have names. This here is Candy Christine." I couldn't help it. I exploded with more laughter. "Candy Christine? Did you come up with that name when you were 12? His cheeks turned a bright red and he took his time checking all of his mirrors before answering me. "How'd you guess? I got the car when I was 12, helped my dad piece it back together, and when it came time for a name, I just put my two favorite things at the time together. I was going through a real Stephen King phase." I kept laughing. The image was just too much. 12-year-old Ben naming his future car Candy Christine was absurdly funny to me. I'm sorry, I gasped in between bouts of laughter. I guess we can be glad that you didn't wait until we're older to name her. Candy probably isn't number one on your list of favorite things anymore. He shrugged. You're right. If I would have waited to name her until I got my license, then she would have been a different kind of candy. Grinning wickedly, he laughed when I turned red as I realized what he meant. Yeah, I probably should have kept my mouth shut on the whole naming of the car thing, but he took mercy on me and stopped teasing. So what are you driving? I'm not. I sighed ruefully. My parents are making me wait to get my license until I'm 17. Man, that sucks. No wheels equals no freedom. I can't imagine what I'd do if I didn't have Candy Christine. She's like family. It's not too bad, I said. My parents are pretty loose with the rules, so I go wherever I want. And since I grew up walking everywhere, I kind of just got used to not having a car of my own. My mom drops me off at my job on the weekend. We had reached the library and he guided the car along until we found the first open parking spot. You have a job? That's cool. Where at? I explained as we got out of the car and walked up the library steps. He listened to what I said and held the door for me while we stepped inside. I didn't get the chance to ask him whether or not he had a job, because we were immediately greeted by a stony-faced librarian who gave us a very stern look. Stopping mid-sentence, I lowered my voice. What section do you think we should start looking in first? Let's see if they have a section for students, he suggested. We might find something there. I agreed, and we quickly set out looking for that section. We didn't find anything on the first floor, and the second floor turned out to be a bust too. But the third floor gave us exactly what we were looking for. Over here, Ben gestured as we rounded the banister and took the last step up. I can see a student section. I followed him in through an archway, and we split up, each taking an end. It looks like there's a whole section on science project ideas, I called out from my half of the shelf. I found some different books specifically on math and science, echoed back to me. I spent a couple more minutes browsing. I must have been concentrating really hard, because I jumped a mile when Ben came around the corner and surprised me. His arms were loaded down with books. Here, I'm going to go see how many we're allowed to check out. After dumping the books in a pile at my feet, he jogged off, and I turned my attention back to the shelf. By the time he returned, I'd added several books of my own to his sizable pile. The librarian said we can only check out 8 books at a time, he said, eyeing the stack in front of me. And even if we both check out 8, we have a lot more than that here. I looked at the pile and quickly counted. We had 32 books between us. The librarian also mentioned some type of study room a couple of floors up, and she said we could reserve it for 2 hours, he continued on. So I just told her we'd use that for now. Feel up to carrying some books with me? My stomach dropped, and not because I was frightened of carrying books. No, it had a little something to do with the fact that I knew exactly what study room he was talking about. I faltered for a moment, but then shook it off. Sure, I said nonchalantly. Let's go. We each gathered up an armful of books, and Ben made sure to pick up twice as many as I did. I gave him a scornful look, but he just turned away and started walking toward the door. It's the manly thing to do, he called over his shoulder. I have to carry more books than you. I readjusted the stack in my hands and followed him, trying to keep my thoughts to myself. This won't be too hard. It's just a room. I can totally do this. I will not think about Caspian at all, and instead I will focus solely on what type of project Ben and I should do for the science fair. When we finally came to the room, I heaved my books down onto the table. Momentarily distracted by the sharp ache in my arms, I swore to myself that I would start working out one of these days. A couple more trips like that would kill me. Ben set his books down too and gave the room a brief once-over. I guess this is it for the next 2 hours. He glanced up at the peeling paint on the ceiling and the faded pictures on the walls. Looks like they blew their decorating budget on all the other rooms in the library. I gave him a wry smile as I spread my books out in front of me and sat down. Then I carefully gave his books a gentle nudge over to the opposite side of the table. He was still prowling around the room, and I tried to ignore him, picking up a particularly heavy-looking book before opening it up to the table of contents. "They obviously don't want anyone getting away with anything in here," he said, pointing to the "keep this door open at all times" sign. I froze. Caspian's words came back to me, and in my head I heard my response. "Well, they never said anything about keeping it wide open." Ruthlessly banishing the memory, I forced my attention back to the book and stared down at the page in front of me. But I wasn't seeing words. I was seeing a memory of white blonde hair and deep green eyes that sparkled above a white smile. That vivid black streak stood out, and for a second I swore that I could almost touch it. Ben's hand waving in front of my face broke the moment, and my thought was shattered. I looked over at him and raised an eyebrow. "Yes?" He was sitting down now, over where I had pushed his books, and he looked aggravated. "I was calling your name, but you didn't answer me. Are you okay?" "No, I'm not okay," my brain screamed, but I just gave him an annoyed look. "Sorry, I was concentrating. We do have to get some work done here, you know." He leaned back in his chair and flipped open a book. "Fine, let me know when you find something." I shrugged and turned back to the page in front of me, half-heartedly flipping through a couple of different sections. I knew I should be paying attention to what was in front of me, but it was really hard to make my brain cooperate. Reminding myself once again of the no thinking about Caspian rule, I started reading about a project that used different sense and the blindfold to test the 5 senses. I quickly got caught up in that section. It sounded like an interesting idea. Ben interrupted my own train of thought. "Do you think we could get our hands on petroleum, alcohol, and ethanol? It would all be used strictly in the name of science, of course. I think that we could make our own gasoline." Placing my finger on the spot where I'd been reading, I looked over at him. "And the point of that would be to not have to pay for gas for my car anymore," he said. "Do you have any idea how much of a gallon of unleaded is going for right now?" I rolled my eyes. "We are not going to figure out how to make gas for your car as a science project. Now keep reading." Returning to my spot, I tried to finish reading, but I ended up casting glances over at Ben. I knew exactly when he'd find another idea that he liked, because his eyes lit up and he wiggled in his chair like a monkey. Sighing, I put my book down again and looked straight at him. "What is it this time?" He looked up at me, practically bouncing in his seat, and said, "How do you feel about the space-time continuum? If we were able to take some mirrors and reflect the light, I think we could calculate a quantum physics theory, and then we could—" He trailed off when he noticed my expression. "Does that fit into the not normal category?" I nodded. "What about time travel?" he countered. I shook my head. "Leave that to NASA or whatever it is they figure that stuff, wherever it is they figure that stuff out. Here, I think I found one." As I read to him from the book I held about a project based on the nose sensitivity and the power of compensating for lost senses, he stared at me blankly. "Did you listen to any of that?" I asked when I'd finished. "I think it would be a really neat project to do. I've always wondered how strong the sense of smell is. When I'm making my perfumes, at times I swear I—" He cut me off. "You make perfume? I didn't know that." I ignored him and kept talking about the project. "Can you just focus here, Ben? Please? I think this is the one for us. It won't be boring. And you'll get to make people smell gross things. How much more fun can you get?" He looked intrigued by the idea, and I took the opportunity to read some more to him from the book, but he interrupted me again. "Are you going to put those red streaks back in your hair, Abby? I really like them." The breath sucked right out of me, and I felt like a fish, gasping for air. It was a blow aimed straight at my heart, and it bruised all the way down to my soul. He didn't have any way of knowing, no way to tell that his question could hurt me so. "What do you think of mine?" Ben asked. "Should I put some red streaks in it? They could match yours." He gave me a smile, but I just sat there in frozen shock. To my immense horror, a tear spilled down my cheek, and I immediately brushed it away, ducking my head in shame. I felt the table shift beneath me, and then there was an awkward touch on my arm. Hey, Ben said softly. We can do the smelly stuff project. It's cool. I was just teasing you about the other ones. I didn't really mean it. I laughed shakily and wiped another tear away before lifting my head. It's not that, Ben, but thanks. I looked around the room and gestured helplessly. This room. It has some memories for me. And when you said that about the red streaks, well... He dropped his hand and took a step back. It reminded you of him, right? Is that a good thing? Or a bad thing? I shook my head and pushed a hand through my hair, tucking a stray curl behind one ear. Honestly, I don't really know. My nose was feeling runny, and I tried to sniff it as discreetly as possible. Things have been kind of messed up, and I don't know what to do. It's just that being in this room again... The memories were a lot happier back then, and I thought I'd be okay. But I'm not. He stepped around the table and put his hand on my arm again. Abby, it's all good. You should have mentioned it to me. We don't have to stay here. I stood up and started pacing back and forth. Would it be okay if we left? We can go back to my house or something. Maybe order a pizza? He nodded and started to gather up the books. I'll go return these to the librarian. You take whatever time you need and meet me downstairs when you're ready, okay? Thanks, Ben. I pushed the book I'd been reading over to him. Check this one out for me and we'll take it with us. He picked up all the books from the table, including the ones that I'd been carrying, turned to the door, and then turned back to me. Are you going to be all right now? No more tears? I don't know how to handle crying girls. Every time my 5-year-old sister turns on the waterworks, I end up buying her a Barbie. You don't need a new Barbie, do you? I shook my head. Shut up, Benjamin Bennett. Don't forget, I know the car naming story. You wouldn't want it to get told to the entire school now, would you? He vanished out the door, and his laughter echoed up to me from the stairwell. After taking a few deep breaths, I forced my chin up and squared my shoulders back. So the no thinking about Caspian rule hadn't gone very well. At least it couldn't get much worse than breaking down and crying in front of a classmate. No, I told myself as I flicked the light off and left the room behind me. It definitely can't get worse than that. I took my time walking down the 5 flights of stairs and ran my finger over the dusty banister as I went. It was while I was stepping down to the first floor that something familiar caught my eye. My eyes registered it before my brain did, but as soon as I realized what it was, I took off in the same direction. I followed it down to a lower floor and found myself in the poorly lit archives room. The air was still stuffy, and towers of books loomed out at me from every turn. I walked down each long aisle, glancing wildly in all directions. I'd seen a flash of white blonde, and there was only one person I knew who had that particular shade of hair. Caspian was here. I searched all over, firmly convinced that I'd seen him. There were only so many places down here for someone to hide. I rounded the last corner before the stairs for a second time, and that was when I saw him sitting at a small table with a book in front of him. He didn't hear me coming, and I was almost right beside him before he looked up. Hi, I said softly. I looked down at what he was reading and saw illustrations of stars. It was the book I'd gotten him for Christmas. Hi, he said back. I got you gifts. He pointed to the book, and I nodded. They're great. Thank you, Abby. My poor bruised ego soared at the way he said my name. I got yours too, Caspian. The drawings are amazing. And the necklace, it's beautiful. Of course I hadn't worn it yet, because just seeing it drove me to tears every time. So it had found a new home under the pillow, hiding away from view but close to my dreams. He looked back down at the book, and awkwardness filled the space between us. I racked my brain for something to say, but only succeeded in remembering that Ben was waiting for me, and that I should probably be on my way to meet him. I've got to go. Someone's waiting for me, I blurted out. He glanced up from the book again, meeting my gaze, and I went weak in the knees. I knew that at that precise moment I would have given anything to go back in time and be up in that study room with him again. Okay, he said, flipping a page and breaking eye contact. See you around sometime. Yeah, see you around, I stuttered. He was back to reading his page again before I even finished my sentence. I hardened my resolve and turned away. If this was how he wanted to act, then two could play that game. Climbing up the stairs, I peeked over my shoulder one last time before he was completely out of sight. I almost stumbled on the step when I saw that he was staring back at me. My eyes locked with his before I tore my gaze away and continued up the stairs. It didn't mean anything. I couldn't let myself think that it meant anything. Ben was waiting for me at the checkout desk, and he looked confused when he saw me on the stairs leading up from the archive room. He did an exaggerated double take. "I thought you were upstairs." "I was," I replied. "But I saw someone I knew and stopped for a minute to go say hi." I led the way out the front door and into the cold sunshine. Ben followed me down the steps. "Was it Caspian? Is he cool with me going over to your house? I don't want to step on any toes." I looked both ways before crossing into the parking lot and heading for his car. "You're not stepping on any toes. Trust me." Ben didn't say anything as we climbed in and he started Candy Christine up. I gave him directions to my house and we rode in silence. When we got there, I made hasty introductions to Mom and Dad, who happened to be home at the same time, and then called in to order the pizza. Ben and I got right to work, outlining what we'd need for the project, and we spent the next hour going over everything. Mom and Dad stayed pretty much to themselves, and I was completely amazed at their restraint. Even when Dad started winking at me whenever he could catch my eye, and I had to give him the stern, "I'm going to kill you if you don't knock it off" look, they managed to keep their cool. I was shocked. When Ben told me that he had to go, I grabbed my coat and offered to walk him out to his car. I gave Dad the look as I went, but he didn't wink at all. The brisk winter air felt cool on my face as I stepped outside, and I pulled my coat closer and buttoned it up. Ben opened the door and sat down, sliding his book bag along to the passenger seat next to him. I stood by the driver's side window. "So how do you want to do this? I have to work weekends at my uncle's, but I'm free after school." Ben revved the engine, and his exhaust made a puff of white smoke in the frigid air. "Do you want to meet Wednesday and Friday afternoons?" he asked. "Amanda has cheerleading practice those days, and I don't start work until 7 each night." I looked down at the gravel driveway beneath my feet. "Nice to know we're planning our science project around this girlfriend." My thoughts must have shown on my face, because he spoke up a little defensively. "Or we can do something else. Whatever works for you." I picked at a stray piece of string on my jacket before looking at him again. "That's okay. It works for me. We'll just meet during that last study hall of the day." He nodded. Okay, I said. "I'll see you tomorrow at school, and thanks for being so nice about everything today, Ben. I really appreciate it." I caught his eye so he could tell that I meant what I said, but he just looked embarrassed and shrugged it off like it was no big deal. "So where do you work?" I asked with a teasing grin. I wanted to turn the topic of conversation as far away from me as possible before he left. "Maybe I'll come torment you sometime." He laughed and put the car into drive, keeping his foot on the brake. "I'm a waiter at the Horseman's Haunt restaurant. Well, a glorified busboy is more like it. If you stop in, I'll make sure you get a free glass of water. On the house." I grinned. "That's too good an offer to pass up." He smiled and waved as he slowly pulled the car forward. "Bye, Abby. See you around." "Bye, Ben," I called back. "Take care of Candy Christine." I heard his whoop of laughter as I walked back into the house. Dad was standing near the door, winking one eye at me, and I sighed while I hung up my jacket. I was obviously going to have to give him a lecture.